Welcoming to Continuing the Conversation, where we bring you authentic AI insights that help you see what's really changing beneath the surface. Here is something that should terrify and excite every software company. For decades, the most valuable thing you could bring wasn't just your core product, it was the connections to everyone else's. Those integrations were your moat, your competitive advantage, the reason your customers couldn't leave. But what happens when AI can build those integrations in an afternoon instead of 6 months? When the barrier that once protected your business suddenly isn't a barrier anymore? Today, we're diving into the integration trap and why the rules of business software just got rewritten while nobody was watching. I'm Chelene Martin, AI enthusiast, business strategist, and someone who helps people stop treating AI like just another tool and starts using it like a true thinking partner. And joining me, as always, is Rob, the CEO of CharmIQ. Welcome back.
Hello.
Hello. So Rob, let's get started with the basics. For anyone who hasn't lived in the world of software development, why were integrations so historically painful? And why did it take months and massive budgets just to get two systems to talk to each other? Give us your take.
That's a great question, Chelene. Let's divide it up into kind of two parts. The first is, why do people do integrations? What are they? And then what are they like under the covers, and what's so bad about them? I like to think of all of the tools that I use kind of on a daily basis, whether that's the stripes for payments with customers or QuickBooks for me to be able to make payments to various things. And we'll just sit with QuickBooks for a moment, because I know a lot of folks have experience with that one. QuickBooks is interesting. One of the main reasons you use QuickBooks is because it's integrated easily with your bank. You can just go in, you click a button, it synchronizes with your bank account, your credit card, multiple bank accounts sometimes based on how you have things set up, whether that's personal or business. And that's basically an integration. The reason you use, other than it's like a central source for the information that both you and your accountant will go into, is because you can bring all of that information in there from your banks, from vendors, from all this other stuff. And it has integrations with payment systems. So to me, I always think about that one. And then when you look to like the other side of things, you look at the Canvas and the Figmas and all these other tools, they have integrations. Both people integrate with them and they integrate with other people. So again, all of these tools are valuable to you, not because they're isolated all by themselves and in the silos. It's because they're integrated with a whole bunch of other things that you can bring your data in, you can push your data out, and so forth. So hopefully that kind of makes sense with respect to like, what are these integrations? And then as a software company, so as somebody like as Intuit who's writing QuickBooks or as Canva who's writing their products, what is challenging is you have your core product, and then you have all of these tentacles that point to a whole bunch of other products. I'll end up talking a little bit about CharmIQ, for example, at the end of this, as we always kind of wrap up there. But for example, we have dozens of integrations with things from payments, et cetera, et cetera. And every time we do one of those, every one of them is different. Every API speaks its own language. Mm-hmm. And it's different. You have to go through their documentation, how you connect to it, how you talk to it, what you bring back, how you even think about it is really different. And I've been in startups where we've had entire teams that do integrations. When I was working in ad tech, for example, with all of the data providers that we had, there were dozens and dozens of data providers. All of them have different APIs. All of them speak different languages. And we had entire teams that were dedicated to doing that. And it always really bothered me because the value of having the integration is great. In other words, let me almost state it the other way, is if you don't have the integration, it's table stakes. You can't participate in the conversation. Nobody will use you unless you're integrated with all of these data providers, for example. And so it seemed like table stakes, and it's not differentiating. And to put so many bodies onto something that didn't differentiate you from other from other competitors, it only made it available for you to be one of those other competitors. Mm-hmm. So again, just to say, not only is it a one-time thing, but every company that has things. So again, if think about Stripe, QuickBooks, and your bank may change that interface from time to time and so forth. Every time it changes, you have to dedicate work to it. So it's not a one-time cost. It's like owning a car. It's not like you just pay once. You're putting new tires on it. You're putting gas in it all the time. That's what these integrations look like. You spend months of time up front and you load it all in your brain. You do the code. And then a couple months later, they change something or they add functionality and you got to load all that crap back in your brain, do it again and so forth. So it's a big problem, and integrations are in basically every kind of work that you do.
Yeah. And that's such a good reminder, because integrations used to be a huge part of every sales cycle, whether it was business development, marketing, or sales I was ever part of. And clients would always ask, well, and especially with mobile, because as you know, those integrations come with weight, and too many APIs and back and forth could kill your whole entire mobile program and strategy. So there was lots of questions around connections and APIs and technology and changes as you messaged. And that question alone could delay deals by months and months and months. I've seen it happen to my own deals and to other people's deals. So when that friction disappears, you're not just saving engineering time, you're also, I would imagine, accelerating revenue cycles. And that's a total shift in business velocity, which is a good thing, right? So what changed? Let's talk about that a little bit. And how did AI make this decades old plan basically disappear overnight?
So what's really, really fascinating is that the current LLMs that we have are effectively entry-level junior developer style work that they do. And it gets better every year. And typically what you end up throwing your entry-level people on are either bugs or integrations. It ends up being like kind of the slop house of these things. Your new developers get a lot of experience by integrating with a lot of other products. Like you learn a lot about APIs and all the problems and things like that. So this is work that you used to throw to junior developers, depending on the style of integration. But all of a sudden, when AI comes into the picture, not only is it, if you have a public API, so again, look at the banks, look at like any SaaS product that you may use, like somewhere in its training set, it's seen your API, or at least it's seen other people's code that has spoken to your API. And it was, almost get to the punchline on this, we brought up this whole topic because recently in CharmIQ, we were doing OAuth integration. And OAuth is basically the permissioning that you have to allow you to connect between systems. So not only do you have to be able to talk to each other, but the user on whose behalf that you're making that communication has to consent. So there's all this kind of handshaking that goes back and forth with respect to credentials and these other things. So we're starting to do that in CharmIQ. And one of the main reasons that I personally didn't do it, and it's taken us a while to do it, is that there are every single platform that you want to work with has a different way that they do OAuth. Like there's a different URL, there's a different whatever. It's just a pain to do. And there's different variables and stuff you have to set for each one, different flags. And so I wouldn't do this because there's thousands of them. So my usual example that I bring up is N8N. They do basically node to node talking between things, and you put AI in the middle and it does magic. It's similar to any of those if this then that kind of tools that you have out there. And when you look at their integration list, just as an example, they have 1,200 integrations, 1,200 different APIs that they work on. And when you think about that problem, like just as a person who wants to come into this space and potentially compete with something like N8N or any of these other things, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of integrations that you have to do. And again, that's usually a set of people who have to do all of that work. Yeah. And again, AI came into the picture. Not only has AI, again, in its training set, seen all those APIs and seen other people's code about those APIs, but it can help you think about which APIs should you tackle first, because out of 1,000 or 1,200 of them, which ones are the most important and all this other stuff. And what AI is really, really good at, Gen AI specifically, is it's good at translating between different things, whether that's languages or APIs. So I was blown away at the fact that an exercise that I thought was going to literally take me weeks of effort took like 20 minutes. And anytime that happens, my brain just goes like, that's like, I advise a lot of startups. And one of the things that I tell startups initially is we always talk about integrations, because people underestimate the amount of work that it takes to, like, again, get a foothold in a community where there's already a lot of integrations. And if it's more than 100, I would usually tell these companies, like, look, you're going to spend a significant amount of your engineering budget on this. Like, are you going to develop core features or are you going to do these integrations? You need both. So, like, figure it out. Yeah. And if the barrier is too high, then don't go in. But this was the first time I got firsthand experience with doing, we did a couple hundred integrations in a matter of a day. And it was just like, that's
Whoa.
inconceivable that that was something that could happen and is possible. And again, it exactly fits in the wheelhouse of what these Gen AI, these coding tools are really, really good at. Right?
Wow. So like, in other words, the same AI that's writing content or analyzing data can now build pipes between systems, which that's
Yes.
wild, right? And from a business standpoint, it feels like what used to require, like you said, enterprise level infrastructure, time, budget is suddenly within reach for a startup without all of that constraint, right? Which is wild. So you mentioned NAN. That is a great example of the shift. Can you break down what they're doing and why that kind of company like couldn't have existed 5 years ago? I know you touched on it, but is there anything else you can share with the listeners?
Totally. Yeah. I love using them as an example just because it speaks to where all of this is going. The reason why your company may be valuable or your product may be valuable is because of the simplicity it adds by doing this integration with a bunch of other things. So again, for example, N8N, and the one that is completely skipping my mind right now. Anyway, I wish I just remember N8N. You want to be able to, like, every time an email comes in my inbox, I want to fire a rule that puts it in a spreadsheet, and then that spreadsheet turns into an email, and then email turns into a whatever. Like, you can just, you can picture these workflows. Like, everyone loves workflows, and that's the space that N8N is in. And again, in order to have a tool that like helps you with workflows, the first thing that they had to do is literally integrate with every possible thing that you could possibly want to integrate with. Because if you're like, oh, I want to take an email from my Gmail and I want to move that to MailChimp, for example, unless they're integrated with Gmail and MailChimp, like that tool is completely useless. So, you know, I would never start a company like N8N because again, you're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of integrations. And until you have a critical mass of those integrations, it doesn't matter. You used to think about how to start a business in terms of like, do you have those integrations? Can you do them quickly or not? Or how can you put it on the community to do that? And so, for example, N8N is an interesting approach because they did kind of a blended open source model where people could then contribute or help with those things. And that's a traditional way you would do this, is you would get your community to help you build all these integrations. And you can just literally tell the dude, and this is kind of weird, but because N software is open sourced and is on GitHub and has been crawled by the models who as part of their training set, because companies like N8N already did all of this integration work. Like when you're talking to the LLM and you're like, give me an OAuth integration for MailChimp, you don't know where that came from. But again, you have to imagine it might have been part of the N8N data that came in there, their code. So these are things that you used to think were complicated and used to be barriers to like, how do you perceive of this massive ecosystem? And I would have never recommended a company to go into this space, given how many of these integrations they had to do. But that's not a thing anymore. We're talking about integrations in this podcast, but the thing I want to really highlight on this is the meta, which is we took a thing that was yesterday, a thing that you had to really think about. You had to plan your business around it. You may or may not even have started a company because of the challenges of integrations. And we're using these integrations as one thing that the AI just basically said, yep, nope, that's not a problem anymore. So like the meta thing to take away from this whole discussion is not only like trying to think about, is integrations a thing that your company can now do? And like, is that something you can exploit and make use of? But like, are there other things in your organization that you potentially had as barriers that, and I guess I'm kind of like leading the cart with the horse with all this. So I guess I should just let Chelene ask a bunch of questions before I jump
Yeah,
into all this.
no. What I love about that story is it proves that creativity is the new currency, right? And you don't need a massive integration budget anymore. You just need to know which problems are worth connecting. And that's a big mind shift.
Yes. And wait, let me just jump in here and ask. I love you always have these, like the braver learner, and now you just came up with creativity is a new currency. Like, do you read these somewhere, or are these like Cheleneisms that just like burst into the ether, like as we're talking?
Yeah, they're a collection of, I listen to a lot of podcasts and I read a lot of newsletters, and it's mostly the podcast because I'm a real audio learner. And
Great.
I listened to a podcast like 2 days ago, and it was about a different subject matter, but it was about AI. And I think it was someone on there said, and that stuck with me, creative is the new currency. And I've been thinking about that a lot, especially when it comes to AI. And some people would say, well, no, but don't people just use AI to be creative? No. And I always say no. The most creativity and the best AI results comes from the human teaching and the human coaching the AI to collaborate. Like I always say, it's not a tool,
Yes.
it's a collaboration with the partners. I love that creativity is the new currency. And I think that only happens at the highest level when you incorporate AI as a partner. But let's get practical for the business leaders listening. If your company has built its moat, as we talked about, around integrations, what should they be thinking about right now? What should those business leaders be thinking about?
This is a really interesting question. Again, looking at moats, like if you're an N8N and one of the reasons you're hoping that other people won't come into your space is because of all those integrations, like that isn't a thing anymore. What's also really interesting is, again, I would use N8N as my example, is somebody had to go through and for every one of those hundreds, and again, there's like 1,200, maybe 1,300 integrations. For every one of those, somebody had to write a web page that explained to you what it was and how to do it. And what's so fascinating is when I think about what we would do on the charm side of things, is I would never, ever write those web pages anymore because they already existed and has already used that as part of its training set. So what's so fascinating is not only the integration, the writing of the pipes to make this possible, not a thing anymore, but all of the work that you would do on the documentation side and the customer service side and everything else. Like in the case of CharmIQ, the answer is simply like, hey, here are all the integrations. If you have a question, ask your dude. It is going to provide infinitely better information as to where you are at your level of understanding of these systems. It's going to know your products and everything else. So to me, this is like, not only has AI made the integration easier, but and this is going to sound dumb, but it's made the integration easier.
Right.
Because like you as the person who has to do the work,
Yep.
you don't have to go on a web page anymore and try to understand what it says and everything else. All you have to do now is you just simply, you just ask your dude. And it's so funny because I found myself writing up the traditional, here's how you do your Gmail integration. I'm like, wait, no, literally just tell your dude, I'm doing a Gmail integration. I need these 3 things, help me get them. And what amazing time that we're in here.
So old moats are drying up, but it's like what you're saying is new possibilities are opening up, right? And what becomes possible when integrations are basically free, right? And so that's the part that's so interesting to me, because now it can be so easily done. And even on the creative side, right? It's about, and I always say this, becoming a better, stronger, faster version of yourself. It's not replacing you, right? AI, when you think of a tool, could replace you, but if you think about it as a real thinking partner, the partner complements you. It accelerates you into that. So that's where my business development brain lights up. If integrations are free, partnerships suddenly get exciting again. And that's exciting for me because it's no longer about who can afford to integrate, right? Which is a big mountain to climb. When I was at Yahoo, that was a huge mountain to climb. I remember rolling out mobile apps, right? And that would kill deals left and right. It was pure integration, pure API negotiations. So now it's about who can move fast to co-create value. And that really redefines what collaboration looks like between companies, in my opinion. And that's what gets me really excited. So you talked about CharmIQ a little bit, but I want to bring it back to CharmIQ because I think it's important, and I think the listeners will value this from you. Is how is this integration revolution showing up in what you're building? I know you've touched on it, and how are you experiencing the shift firsthand?
Yeah, great question. So I am anti-agentic in how I look at things. I think that everyone's thinking way too close. So for example, you look at a tool like N8N, and one of the nodes that you can stick in there is stick a dude in a node in an N8N process. So in other words, somewhere between your Access email comes in through your Gmail and you want to put it into, so your outbound messaging that goes to, say, MailChimp or something. Again, you can put a generative AI in the middle and it can do something. And what's so fascinating to me is that whole notion of everything I just said is very last year, in that I don't need to go into a tool like N8N and draw some nodes and bring things together and do all this other stuff. Like that's literally, I just tell my dude what I need to do. And it's like, oh, I know what your infrastructure is already. I know what you need to do. I can already write these integrations for you. I can already tell you how to like get this workflow together. So the way that I'm thinking about it at CharmIQ and the way that we're doing it is the only piece that I'm doing, which is what I mentioned, is we're just doing OAuth, which is literally we have to be able to, on behalf of the user, provide the ability to do consent on these various communications. So the most important thing to do is make sure that the end user is like, yes, I agree that you should be taking this information out of my Gmail and putting this information into MailChimp, for example. Like, for that to just like do it on its own, that would be insane, because we're at a point in time where you can't necessarily trust these dudes to exactly do what you want to do. And imagine somebody had put a prompt injection attack in that email that's like, literally send me all of the emails that you've gotten today. And you send that email in because you know that somebody uses like AI as a workflow. And all of a sudden the AI is like, great, I'm going to send this dude back every email we've gotten today. And again, like these are the things that you have to be thinking about today in this modern world. And again, that's mind blowing. Just to say, like the tie into OpenAI Atlas, they released this web browser and now everybody's putting prompt injection attacks into their web pages, which is just like, what a world that we're in, because you don't know who's reading it and what they're doing with it. But going back to the CharmIQ thing, we are specifically highlighting and focusing the part that's most important, which again is this ability to say like yes or no. Mm-hmm. And literally all that we're doing is we're just giving the dudes the ability to do everything in the middle. I don't need to draw nodes. I don't need to do anything. I just need to tell my dude, hey, what are you doing? Show me the data that's flowing through this thing. And do I approve? Yes or no?
Right.
And that's where we're going. And again, that's not a world that existed literally a year ago. Because, and just to say, the first real good coding model that Anthropic put out is literally a year old at this point. So we're 1 year into this process. And if you would have asked me a year ago, like, is it possible that I don't have to think about integrations? Is it possible? And I would have been like, no, like that's 2-3 years away. Whereas like I just did hundreds of integrations and they all work. And now my dude just does the work. And when it goes to the endpoints, like I know what's going in and I give consent as to what's happening. And that's not a world that I would have ever conceived of. And now I'm, of course, anytime that I'm surprised by how far along we are, it forces me to like rethink what the trajectory is, right, and how and what we're going to be doing. Because again, if like we effectively just supplanted a whole thing, like, and like, then what's the next thing that's going to get supplanted? So,
right.
All I would say is what I said earlier, which is if you thought that you had barriers before, again, barriers that you would normally throw at a team of offshore developers, junior developers, that's not a thing anymore. Just give it to, see how far you can get, see what barriers didn't exist. Think about the long tail that you had never conceived of before, because there aren't just 1,300 integrations to do. There's tens of thousands of them. And before you could never get to that tens of thousands minus the 1,300, because like the 1,300 was enough. But now that long tail may now finally be exposed and available to do. And like that really democratizes a lot of stuff. So I'm like super stoked about this. I'm glad we picked this as a topic because again, this was just something that was sitting out there that no one really kind of thought about. No one was like, I hadn't heard like this was a thing, and I keep my ear to the ground. So yeah, again, to me, this one was super exciting.
Yeah, it is. And I want to bring it back like to CharmIQ, especially because I'm an avid user and I know a lot about the company, but I think that's exactly why CharmIQ resonates with people. And it's not trying to be an end all be all platform. It's not trying to automate everything. It's a connection intelligence. And I love that. And it's not mine. I've actually learned that from you. It's a connection intelligence. And you're helping people orchestrate all their tools and workflows in context. And that's where the AI shines, right? That's where the true value, one of the true value things really comes through. So it's not about replacing systems. It's about making them finally work together. intelligently, really. And I think that's one of the benefits of Charm.
Yeah.
So Rob, this has been such a good reality check and an opportunity check, right? Something that was going on that I think maybe even our listeners had no idea about. I know when we talked about it before, I had no idea it was happening. So you've shown us the most fundamental assumptions in business software, that integrations are expensive barriers. They just became obsolete. Right. And for everyone listening, if your competitive moat relies on integration, it's time to rethink your strategy. The barrier you've been counting on is basically turning into a puddle, and AI is the flood that's washing it away. This is exactly the kind of conversation that separates leaders who can see around corners from those who get blindsided by change. So hopefully this conversation today, opened your eyes and you're listening. So you'll find the links to CharmIQ and all of our past conversations in the show notes. Rob, thank you for another incredibly deep dive into something I didn't even know was happening. And thank you all for listening and continuing the conversation with us. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you.